I want to quote something to you. I believe my new hate crime and hate speech bill will contribute in a very real way to allowing everybody in Ireland to live without fear, to live the most authentic version of themselves. Minister, that's something that you tweeted on the day that you introduced this bill in the Dáil. I don't think you tweeted it today, and it would be very strange if you did, because what your bill has done in a very real way is to contribute to a lot of ordinary people's fear that there is no longer, and there will no longer be clarity if this legislation passes about what they may or may not say in terms of robust freedom of expression. Expression not intended to harm people, but expression that might certainly offend people, and indeed expression that could well be called a hate, as such expression frequently is. The Minister, in regard to that very word hate, which is at the core of the bill, and I want to say first of all that the sensible thing for you to do here would be to separate out the hate crime dimension of this bill, which is what you say we need to get done in line with international standards. You would get that through in a heartbeat. And if you're seriously interested in consultation, you would cut that off and put that through, and we could return on another occasion then to tease out the issues of hate speech, because fundamentally it's not the incitement to violence that worries anybody here. We're all against that. We're all against hate crime, or we accept what you're seeking to achieve in that area. It is the incitement to hatred dimension of this bill, because the bill leaves hate undefined. And I wonder, why is that, Minister? Your predecessor reminded us that the Department of Justice's view was that hatred is a commonly understood concept in law. Minister Harris says he did not wish to be overly prescriptive because he wants to avoid, quote, the unintended consequence of actually raising the bar for successful prosecution. Without any further guidance, we can only presume that the current Garda understanding of hate will apply, and that definition currently is, in relation to non-crime incidents, is any non-crime incident which is perceived by any person to, in whole or in part, be motivated by hostility or prejudice. Is that to be the subjective standard for investigating and harassing citizens? Any incident perceived by any person to be motivated by prejudice? Is this bill to be a licence for cranks and for the easily offended? I hear Senator Ward, trust me, I'm a barrister, approach to this legislation. Well, frankly, to paraphrase Ronald Reagan to Mikhail Gorbachev, let me tell you why we don't trust you. Because you come in here with college debate-level denigration of sincere concerns of many, many people, concerns that have been forcefully and relatively articulately expressed by a broad range of people in recent times. And your response is to denigrate them, and then to tell us as rubbish, and then to tell us that you will listen carefully nonetheless to what is proposed. No, I certainly won't. Listening to your office, Minister, one would think that this bill, you say that this bill is about tackling extreme forms of hate. Your officials seek to reassure the public, but it's not. It's about tackling anything understood as hate, be it mild or extreme. You use words in page 5 and 6 of your own speech here to reassure us that you reiterate it's been drafted to criminalise only the extreme form, extreme not mentioned in the bill, that deliberately not mentioned in the bill, incite or stir up not mentioned in the bill. You use language. I can't understand why your officials put that in your speech, because to ordinary, and I'm not accusing you of anything here, but that is a deception to use language like that when it is not in the bill. So, Minister, your presentation of the bill at second stage to the Dáil and the reassuring language, some of which you've repeated again now here, it's just not there in the language of the bill. You said at the time, while individuals can hold and express opinions that others might find offensive or shocking, I want to make it clear that it's the extreme, as I just said, stir up, just not in the bill. You have lowered the threshold, and indeed you say that that is your intent, or certainly the government has been saying it wants more prosecutions. So, you know, you will understand and know, Minister, that there are international understandings in this regard. From the Council of Europe in September 2022, measures to combat hate speech should be appropriate and proportionate to the level of severity of its expression. Some expressions of hate speech warrant a criminal law response, while others call for a civil or administrative law response, or should be dealt with through measures of non-legal nature. Nothing of that here. You've gone for the extreme end of social sanction, namely the criminal law, to target people's speech. Now, we are all against incitement to violence. We are all against incitement to hatred of a kind that can harm people. But in the absence of a definition of hatred, and in a society dominated by cancel culture now, where people are frequently accused of being haters for expressing points of view that are not hate, simply robust expressions of opinion. We had the honour, some of us, of listening today to Dr. Helen Joyce, who briefed some of us. She's the Braeborn author of Transgender Identity and the New Battle for Women's Rights. She and many others have been cancelled, denied a forum in university for simply speaking the truth about gender. And she is one of the many people that has concerns about the impact of this legislation. I don't know if she's in the gallery. I would welcome if she was, because she has done the state some service by her work. You know, so Minister, what about a definition of hatred? Since there is such a thing as extreme hate speech, and there's also hate speech that should be dealt with through measures of a non-legal nature, what about a definition to put people at ease? Let's not hide behind the hope of a benign prosecution service. When the social media mob is on the rampage, the Gardaí and the prosecution service will have little choice but to pursue the Graham Linehans and the J.K. Rowlings of Irish society for robustly expressing their points of view. Of course, I should not have to make this plea. Freedom of expression is a fundamental human right. Without it, there's no free exchange of ideas at all levels within society. In short, there's no democracy. And that's why we use the term fundamental. Freedom of expression doesn't just apply to information or ideas that are favourably received or regarded as inoffensive or as a matter of indifference, but also to those that offend, shock or disturb the state or any sector of the population. That again is from the Council of Europe, but there's no nod to that kind of standard in your legislation. Your office's letter to an inquirer suggests that freedom of expression can be limited or restricted by law for compelling reasons, including protecting other fundamental human rights. But the right not to be offended is not and never will be a fundamental right. But one can sense in this legislation, and I hope I'm wrong on this, a surreptitious attempt to set a new international standard, one which might be applicable to all social media companies and their users all across Europe. There is no doubt that undefined hate speech creates a dilemma for social media companies who, conscious of Irish law, will be obliged to err on the side of caution and thus will bring down a dark pall on freedom of expression throughout Europe. That's what's called the chilling effect. And it is that that has so many people worried about the legislation. Because it's not in the end a question of who will be prosecuted to the point of being convicted. It is who will be prosecuted or harassed in the first instance by the forces of law and order and put through a process which is in itself the punishment, simply for robustly expressing the point of view. And it's not those of us who have parliamentary privilege. It's the ordinary Joe or Jane who perhaps doesn't always express themselves as eloquently. Maybe even they express themselves rudely or crudely. But they have the right to express themselves in a democracy. It's important that we are able to tolerate things that offend our ears, provided, of course, that they are not harming people or exposing people to harm. But you have put no such test into the legislation. You have put in a word that you refuse to define. And whatever about hatred being undefined in the 1989 legislation, it's so much more serious that it's undefined now, because we are in the context of cancel culture, where we see people trying to shut each other down. And it's precisely because of that that the expansion of this legislation to include a radical new definition of gender, that to my mind in many ways at the core of this bill, because we are right in the middle of the culture wars there. We're in the very place where people want to close each other down. One doesn't expect the government, frankly, to present a revolutionary new definition of such an important term as gender in a criminal law bill. It is unprecedented. It's not been discussed to date. It escaped Dáil's scrutiny. And despite my and other senators' attempts to find out from your predecessor what that definition means, we've been unsuccessful. I'd like people... No, thank you, Barry. I would like us all to pause for a moment to take this in. Gender will now mean, quote, the gender of a person or the gender which a person expresses as the person's preferred gender or with which the person identifies and includes transgender and a gender other than those are male and female. Now, even in the 2015 legislation, transgender meant you chose one or other of the existing genders. This redefines all that and creates further new new realities. There's about 105 currently internet listed. Amagender, Acegender, Agender, Androgyne, Apogender, Astronomique, Cookie gender, gender cast, fluid queer, one that I can't politely render here, hyperfluid, etc. And all of this is now being landed right into the middle of a criminal law, potentially, where somebody could be attacked for being a hater, for stating in robust, but necessarily robust terms, that not only is this nonsense, it is dangerous nonsense, it is nonsense that puts children at risk when it's imported to the curriculum of schools, and we saw that the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment was moving in that direction when it was originally talking about presenting gender as a spectrum. All this stuff that's not evidence-based, that has parents worrying around the country, and you landed right in the middle of a hate speech bill which doesn't even define hatred, and you wonder why people are worried about their freedom of expression in a democracy. Insofar as this means anything, the gender binary is no longer what the state wishes to protect. It's the opposite. The time-honoured scientific binary definition will no longer be the preferred one under this legislation. And it's not simply that a new understanding of gender is being recognised, it's being afforded the title of protected characteristic, which leads to questions about whether consistent non-conformity to preferred pronouns will bring the threat of prosecution on someone. Will mocking memes be tolerated? Robust campaigning by parents against inappropriate school curricula be allowed? Will carrying a placard saying men can't breastfeed warrant a hate speech investigation, or up to 5 years imprisonment and a lifelong label as a criminal hater and all the stigma and life limitation that goes with that? Nobody actually knows, Minister. Someone intimated that the conflation of gender, gender expression and gender identity arose as an attempt to limit the number of protected characteristics. Well, as I say, in the light of what I said, it has done nothing but extend the risk, and it is the vagueness at the heart of this bill. It is the non-definition of hatred that is the real weapon here, because it creates the uncertainty in ordinary people's minds about what they may say or may not say in a cancel culture, as I said, where people are called haters, where you will have people piling on people if they say something that's unpopular, calling on the Gardaí to investigate. All of that pressure. When you have existing legislation that could be carefully amended, the 1989 legislation, where you have the public order legislation that could be amended if necessary to give effect, to get the more prosecutions that we've been told you want without giving us any practical day-to-day examples of things that should have been prosecuted successfully but which weren't. So for all those reasons, it would be impossible for people who are concerned about this bill to accept it at second stage, Minister, and I sincerely hope that you and your officials will have a rethink about what you're pushing through the Shannon these days. Gurmila Mahagat.